As in, I'm not normal. That's all I was getting.
No, I like that. I like that. I'm on board with that 100%.
There you go.
I'm in the same boat.
There we go.
But yeah, I mean, are you somebody that's reactionary to the schedules and, likes to look for
Look, I
certain?
think it's interesting. I look. It's if anything, it's just that first sign of, actually feeling like the season's on us now. Like that. That's what's fun. I mean, it certainly can look for some beginning narratives and things to look for in the opening. Some things. Not that week one, proves much, but we'll save it for the show.
Proves a little something. I mean, I think it has an effect on some of the quarterbacks too. If you're somebody who likes to stream quarterbacks for one quarterback leagues and whatnot, but I think that I think we get in the Twitter community, we get so far ahead of like everything that we're trying to do, and we're trying to have the next big league and do all like
the thing
things.
I don't buy into is the strength of schedule bullshit. Like that all sounds fine and dandy until 2 injuries happen, and the next thing you know, it's a whole different bag. So like that's all cute, but like I throw that stuff out the window.
Yeah, I can understand
for the most part.
I like looking at cornerback matchups and stuff, but I was oops, I think I just shared the wrong thing to a group. But yeah, no, I think that the strength of schedule, like for cornerback matchups, are interesting, but like Amari Cooper last year proved me dead wrong that shit doesn't matter. So, all right, let's go ahead and kick this show off. You ready?
Yep.
Cool. Let's do it.
This is Fantasy Intervention. Now here to intervene with your fantasy life, Chase Vernon.
Oh, I am not alone. I am not alone today. Welcome on into Fantasy Intervention. We have with us Mr. Black Book himself, Joe Pisapia. What's going on, man? How you doing?
What's up, Chase? Thanks for having me on the show, man. It's fun to chat to you. We're here. There's a schedule. There's a season. Let's go. No more hypotheticals. We're finally getting into the real NFL season is now upon us, and that's a very exciting time.
No, but we got the draft already set in, man. We got the schedule ready to rock and roll, like you just brought up. I mean, I'm ready to go. Like, we just fast forward now to September and just get this season started because I am ready. I'm amped up.
But we've got draft season, which is so much fun, and all the hypotheticals and all the would you rather's and all that stuff. We've got a good 3 months of that to kill. Still, we gotta pace ourselves slowly.
It gets a little bit painful around like early July, right? When you're just talking about like rookie mini camps and you're hearing all the coach speak and all that other stuff. So it's it's definitely something we got to fight through, but I'm ready for it, man. And I'm excited over this next few months because the speculation's half the fun before the fantasy season actually starts out too.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's going to be a fun rookie class, too. A lot of young quarterbacks entering the league again. It's going to be very interesting to watch. You got some big-time wide receivers. You're going to get some running backs who ended up some really good spots for your fantasy shares. So that's going to be really interesting to see how it all breaks down. And look, who knows? Maybe we'll have a move of an Aaron Rodgers or something monumental like that. You never know. It seems like the signing of Blake Bortles today. I don't know if you want to read too much out of that or not. I don't personally, but I know everybody else is. So we'll see how that ends up.
There had to be a safety net somewhere, right? Like, they still need training camp arms. They still need arms to throw, throughout the preseason and whatnot. So we got to see how that goes. But real quick, Joe, can you let everybody know where to find you, how you're qualified to be talking fantasy football?
Oh, geez. It's easier to not find me, I would usually say. You can follow me on the Twitter machine, of course, at Joe Pisapia 17. You can catch me on FantasyPros. I'm the host of the podcast and the videos over there. And we do the baseball show every morning. We're doing the football podcast. We just came off the live draft. We got some really cool stuff going on the next few weeks, too. We've got a lot of shorter shows almost every day. We're going to be releasing content over at FantasyPros in May and through June. So that's very exciting for those of you who just can't get enough. And, of course, the Fantasy Football Black Book 2021 will be out hopefully June 1st. That's our target date, as always. And I know people are already asking me when it's coming out. So it's very exciting to see that everyone's excited. And this time last year, there was so much uncertainty. It's just nice because I think we all have a feeling of, okay, it's okay, things are getting better. There's people in crowds. Last year we had a full season. It had its hiccups, but it was still a season nonetheless, and that was better than no season at all. So, so all those things and always a few other things as well. You can catch me on Sports Grid every weekend too, hosting the TV there.
No, I absolutely love that, man. And it's like I'm sitting there, I'm going through your feed, and I'm like, man, does he even talk football anymore? Because it was like all baseball. But guess what? We're there.
Talk football. There. I just did 5 straight hours of the draft, and I didn't get out. I got up for 1 pee break at 5 hours. That's it. Just one, man. So yeah, I'll talk football every day, man. We've been doing 3 or 4 shows a week. We did the rookie mock drafts. Oh my goodness, so many of those. But I was just happy that we're done with the draft and we have actual guys and actual spots now that we can actually sit down. But yeah, it's just that overlap right now. We're in baseball season too, so I have to wear more than one hat, which is good because I get cold sometimes.
No, it's something as to where it's heating up. We're ready to rock and roll. And of course, you brought up the fact that you were doing like rookie drafts and whatnot, rookie mock drafts, and that was like the last thing that I listened to from you guys. It might have been even the most recent episode, but it was up.
Yeah.
I was sitting there and I was like, okay, the 101's obvious, right? It's Trevor Lawrence. And you got to take Trevor Lawrence. I think that was actually your first pick overall. But sitting there looking at it, like the Jaguars are making me a little bit nervous, right? I mean, we're sitting there and we're looking at Urban Meyer drafting a running back in the first round. He brought in Tim Tebow. It's not agreeing with the rest of the coaches and other people in the locker room. It's like it's getting a little bit weird. And all of a sudden it kind of hit me. I was like, dude, this feels like a team, right? From 2002. Like this is like it's coming back to me, and I'm like, man, this is scary because this team in 2002. I was sitting there, I was looking at their drafts right this morning. They both drafted quarterback, running back, defensive back, and the Jags went offensive tackle. This team went wide receiver, and then they both went defensive back again for a second time. All in all, their draft ended up coming out to they each took 1 quarterback, 1 running back, 2 defensive backs, 1 defensive lineman, 1 tight end. The other team actually had 2 offensive tackles versus just 1. And then the only real difference was fullback versus linebacker. And I was like, this is weird, man. This is getting weird. Now, they both had rookie head coaches as well. Do you have any idea? Could you take a wild guess of what team I'm talking about?
God, 2002. I don't know. It's not the Dolphins, right? I'm trying to remember. Nope. Who is it?
Well, this team spread the offense out, right? They wanted to get the ball out quick. They wanted to try and get as much speed on the field as possible. The Washington Redskins, right, who is now the Washington football team. They had Spurrier come in, and Spurrier was this offensive, brilliant head coach, like had all of his ducks in a row, knew what he was doing, had everything lined up. It all seemed to be perfect, right? And they started out real hot, only to completely just, fall off. So with that being said, Patrick Ramsey was the quarterback who they took 32nd overall.
Yeah.
And he just got decked over and over and over again. He started seeing ghosts himself, just like we heard from Sam Darnold. But I mean, he would sit there and think that somebody was on his back just to find out that there was nobody actually behind him, and he'd freak out and almost go to the ground every single time. Now, with that being said, do you think that the Jaguars, in any way, shape, or form, could end up defaulting back just like Spurrier's Washington football team did back in 2002?
Well, I'll say this to start. They're in a much better position in terms of the quarterback. I mean, you're talking about a generational talent in Trevor Lawrence, and I do believe that. So I have some skepticism, kind of like you, about Urban Meyer. I don't think it's a lock situation by any stretch of the means. Now, he's a wonderful head coach in terms of what he's accomplished in his college coaching career. So the man knows his football, that's for sure. And I think that to compare in terms of eerily similar and taking positions and all that, yes, that is certainly something to send shivers up and down your spine. But when you're starting with Trevor Lawrence, who nobody can put a comp on him because he's so unique. He's almost like that meme that you put together where he said, well, if you have the brain of Peyton Manning, but you had the legs of a very mobile quarterback and really good arm strength, but maybe the accuracy of a Tom Brady, like he's got all these things to put in there. And that's what makes him so special and unique. So I think that Trevor Lawrence will be good and perform well, regardless of Urban Meyer's potential deficiencies here. And it's funny, we were talking about how long Urban Meyer might even be there. And it's very possible he could be there maybe 2.5 to 3 years in that window if things don't really get off to a good start. Look, let's see what it is before we kill it. There's definitely reasons to be concerned. I have them too. I think bringing in Travis Etienne was actually a positive thing because I don't know how much stock you want to put in an undrafted free agent James Robinson. As good as he was, he did wear down as the season goes on, as most running backs do. I thought Etienne was a terrific pickup where they got him there. I know some people say, well, you could have gone lots of different ways. Yeah, you could have, but you know what? He's going in there with 3 very capable wide receivers, a running back he's familiar with, and a coach who's got something to prove. And I think that's also something to keep in mind here. So as much as there is concern in terms of it is far from a lock that Urban Meyer is going to come in and be a very good head football coach in the NFL level, there's enough of a time where I think we all have to let it breathe and just kind of see.
Yeah, no, I couldn't agree with you more. I mean, sitting there and looking at it does make me nervous. So that's why I wanted to put the
It's
question.
fair. It's fair. Well, I mean, it makes you nervous because the last 10 years tells you these guys don't transfer very well from college to the NFL. He might be the anomaly because of the fact that this is a guy that's gone to multiple places, built multiple programs over different stuff. But the college game and the NFL game are very different. The good news, he's got a young quarterback who hopefully he's coming in with and he can kind of mold as opposed to coming into a situation that's complicated. And especially a situation like you were referring to the Redskins. Think about that ownership situation and how bizarre and bad that organization's been for the last 20 years. And it's only until Ron Rivera's really come in. And they've even gone through Shanahan and really big name coaches too. But Rivera is the first guy to really come in there and feels like it's kind of changed the makeup of the organization a bit.
I feel like there was a point where you thought McGloin was actually going to change everything from the personnel aspect of things. You know, he was making the right decisions. They were drafting the right players. Obviously, that didn't last because he started getting too much credit, and Bruce Allen had to end up, forcing him out of town. But no, I completely agree with you, and I think that, you still got to take your shots, at least, on these guys in fantasy. Now, real quick, Jamie Parag actually did have a question for you. He wanted to know if he can get an autographed version of Black Book this year.
Jamie, it's only going to lose value if I sign it. That's the only thing I can tell you. But yeah, I've actually, believe it or not, I've actually signed a few people actually who've sent me, hey man, if it makes you happy, Jamie, I'm just happy you're happy. And hopefully we're winning you some money. That's what we want to do. And we got a great group this year too. I'm super excited about the crew this year that we have contributing. It's just off the chart, man. And we're so excited just to, be writing about football and putting it out there. We're in the thick of it right now. So like I said, this is prime writing season for the next week and a half or so. And then we're going to have it out there. So Jamie, I appreciate the fact that you're excited that the book's coming out. Believe me, I am too. Once it's off my plate, I can enjoy the rest of my year.
No, I'm excited for it. Obviously, you promote it through Fantasy Football Discussion, who is, a big part of Fantasy Intervention. We do the podcast for that page. And so we get a lot of fans from there who I know are a big fan of your book as well. I've seen the comments. I'm a big fan of them too.
Yeah, that's a good discussion. It is. It's you know what? Some of these Facebook groups, sometimes there's nonsense, but for the most part, I mean, some really good stuff going around there. And sometimes even it's just for a good laugh too. Some people post some fun stuff in there, and sometimes you need that. You're flipping around, you're having a crappy day, and you see something really funny there. Like Aaron Rodgers with a Karen wig, and that just makes me happy.
That's brilliant. I love it. I missed that one. I got to go back and check it out.
Oh, it's there. It's tremendous.
Oh, the Karen wig. That one's amazing. All right, so let's go ahead and get into some of these questions. I wanted to address your rookie draft. And obviously, if you guys want to listen to it, go over to Fantasy Pros, check it out after you guys listen to this episode. And you can go through and actually see what picks he made, listen to why they took him. But the first thing that kind of struck me, right, it was super flex, but Williams, right? Mm-hmm. Javonta Williams fell all the way to 111. You actually took Devonta Smith over him. So does he have the backfield to himself in Denver in 2022? Or, are you thinking that they're still going to use a committee? Why did he fall to 111?
Well, look, it was back and forth there for me in that one. I'm higher, and actually, ironically, so is Tags. We're both much higher on Devonta Smith than a lot of other people because we think that this version of the NFL that we're seeing right now is actually not as negative towards his body type as some people want to make it out to be, especially early on. So a lot of this also has to do with rosters too. I mean, if you're in a dynasty rookie draft and you've got a running back need, obviously if Williams is there, you would still take him. Now, I'm cautiously optimistic that Williams takes over this job at some point. Between Melvin Gordon's off the field things that he's had to deal with, between his on the field injuries that he's had to deal with. I mean, let's not pretend like Melvin Gordon hasn't missed significant time in these last few seasons anyway, before he even came over to the Broncos. So I love Williams. I think he's going to be an excellent addition there. I also, at the same time, I want to win. And I think Smith gives me the best chance to win now. And as much as that might seem a little short-sighted, I think sometimes we get too far ahead of ourselves. I like to build teams for, that 2 to 3 year window. And I think Smith by a hair in my opinion, gives me that better chance to do that because I think his window is going to be more like 2 to 3 or 4 years long as opposed to, Williams, where it might take him a year just to get that job. And then, okay, now next year, let's see how he handles the workload. And there's, the bigger injury quotient with the running backs as well. So again, we're splitting hairs on those two guys. Both you could make the argument to even go sooner. But I am very bullish on Williams. I could tell you in the Black Book too, in terms of his relative position value. I'm looking at him as a good investment this year. And especially now that we're in that 17-week season now, where 17 games, I should say, that is going to be different too, because you're going to see running back management. Even though it's one game, I think it's going to impact running back management for a lot of teams in the NFL.
Well, that's interesting because back before 2019, right around that range, like rookie wide receivers, they weren't producing like at all. This past year, I believe, definitely put an emphasis on the rookie wide receivers because we had players like Justin Jefferson and CeeDee Lamb. Like they performed at a very, very high level. Even T. Higgins, to an extent, performed at a very high level for a rookie wide receiver. But that's interesting because of the fact that you probably wouldn't have heard that in 2018, that a wide receiver gives you, more immediate return over a rookie running back. Now, running backs that I'm not huge fan of, right? Like I think they're going way too early in drafts, are Michael Carter and Trey Sermon. I'm sitting there and I'm looking at it, and they're like 2 to 3 picks behind where Williams is getting drafted in a lot of these drafts, which is kind of mind blowing to me because I think that Williams is on a whole different level compared to these two other running backs. We're sitting there and, people talk about how the Jets, they got their running back. They got him in the 4th round, right? So, did they really go and target their guy? So with that being said, how close are these running backs together in terms of, where you have them ranked? And what would you be willing to pay in order to move up to grab Williams if they're going this close? Because you're talking about 1 or 2 spots.
Well, if you're talking about a drop-off, I think Williams, and then there's a drop-off for sure. That I absolutely agree with 100%. The problem is then what's remaining there, and it's guys like Carter and Sermon. Now, with Carter, I do think that they did get their guy. I think the interesting thing is that what you have with Carter is a situation where touches might become very available to him right away. Plus, you can't really worry about the 4th round grade and things like that on running backs because running backs been devalued in the NFL across the board. So he could very well have been their guy and they just got a discount because other teams just don't want to make investments or they're good at the position or they already took guys. So, I don't want to kill the Jets because or Carter because he was a 4th round pick so much. He was a productive player. He's also a player who doesn't have the same tread on his tires as a lot of guys, which is funny because, sometimes people use that as a knock on a player entering the NFL. I don't think it is. I think if you look back in the history of these guys who say, well, he shared a backfield, I don't know, well, you know what? Turns out those guys last a little bit longer than some of the other dudes who were workhorses in college and then come up here, and then by the time they get to the NFL, they're blown out. In terms of Sermon, I think a lot of people, especially in the fantasy football community, who are good analysts, they recognize that Sermon kind of fits potentially well with that offense. And I think they're putting the cart before the horse a little bit. I think there's some other guys ahead of him, obviously, you got to worry about. And I still think Jeffrey Wilson Jr. is fascinating in San Francisco. He finished the season so strong, and every time you gave that guy 20 carries, he produced. And he also was the guy that produced big, long runs and opportunities to score, too, which is something that Mostert, I think, struggles with sometimes. And I think the Sermon thing is more just people loving the Shanahan running back, and the Carter thing is more just a volume play, because after that, where do you go? After that, there isn't a whole lot to get excited about. So there's a bit of an overpay, yeah. But I think when it comes to Carter, the overpay makes sense because you can cut a clearer path for him right away. And I think that's part of the reason.
You don't think it's going to be Tevin Coleman?
If I have to, God, it's like trying to, the Tevin Coleman thing. I mean, even going back to Atlanta, I was never a Tevin Coleman guy. And I just don't get the fascination with him. I just don't understand. It just drives me nuts.
Well, the interesting part, too, that not enough people are talking about is the fact that they can actually, I believe they can cut Mostert, correct? And save a ton of money.
They probably, yeah, they can, I believe. But, the thing with Mostert, why I wasn't buying into it at all last season was because, when you have a guy who's bounced around at 5 different organizations in 3 years, how can 5 different organizations miss on a guy? Like, that to me is always suspect. And I think that whole San Francisco team just went on a good hot run at the right time. And that was it. And that's all that she wrote. And this year it came in. I thought Mostert in 2020, was the, by far one of the more overrated assets you could go out there. People were way too comfortable with his ADP. I was not one of them. And going into it this year, I think they're surprisingly still comfortable. Whereas you can get Jeffrey Wilson later on, and I would rather speculate on him as a third or a flex running back or somebody for my bench, depending on how deep my league is, because I just think when I see on the field is Wilson being the most productive running back of all those guys, and Sermon's going to take a little while to get going if he even does get those opportunities early on, which I doubt because it feels like the 49ers want to compete.
Yeah, well, it's interesting because I feel like they're probably going to have 6 different running backs that probably all get at least 50 carries because that's how they operate anyway.
If you have 6 running backs, do you have one?
No, you don't. So that's where the value is. And like you said, there's a little bit of an overpay there. So with that being said, we got a question in the chat from MM321123. Which rookie running back has a shot to provide like the most substantial value relative to the draft position? So for me, I'm just going to go ahead and go out there and say Kenny Gainwell if something does happen to Miles Sanders or they feel like, he's definitely a third down back because Kenny Gainwell, I saw him in a draft the other week. He fell to like 211 or 301 or something along those lines. It was like late second, early third. I mean, that's a tremendous return if he can perform because you don't find running backs that deep that actually give you that value outside of maybe a James Robinson, which is very rare. So with that being said, which rookie for you, running back, could provide the most substantial value relative to the draft position?
Well, I'll tell you what, I think Gainwell's an interesting one and an excellent answer. I am not somebody who's sold on Miles Sanders, and I think everyone's writing a very simple narrative right now, which is, well, Doug Peterson's gone, so that means automatically things will be better for Miles Sanders. Well, not necessarily. It's a different head coach. It might not be his guy. And although Miles Sanders has had some moments, it's still an offensive line that is not great, even though they've made some minor improvements year over year. Now, the good news is whoever is going to be running the football for the Eagles, it'll be a better situation because Hurts wears down defensive lines a little bit more chase going on there, no pun intended, in terms of wearing them down as the game goes on. And that's a good opportunity for the running backs as you get into the second half to really sort of open things up. I think Travis Etienne right now is one of these guys that people are still like, whoa, but James Robinson, there's some draft capital behind Travis Etienne. This whole nonsense about, well, we're going to use him and then, sparing spots at third down. Yeah, right. Well, why'd you spend that kind of draft capital to get that guy then? That makes no sense to me. So I think Etienne is one of those guys where you might see as we get closer and closer into August, and then you start to see him play in August and people get excited. And also the comfortability factor in that backfield with Trevor Lawrence. That could be a guy that I think is going to be a riser as we get closer to the season, especially if he has a good preseason.
Yeah, I agree with you 100%. And Sean, I think that's a pretty good draft considering you had the 102, 202, 302, and 402. Hunter Long's going to be very interesting, which I believe we are going to talk about here in a little bit. So stay tuned if you want to hear some talk about Hunter Long. And by the way, MM321123 depends on what you're really into bourbon-wise. I've been playing a lot lately with Buffalo Trace, of course, but that's a popular one already. I'll give you some more recommendations after the show. All right, so let's go ahead and hop on to the next topic because Rondo Moore fell, I believe, like right behind. He got drafted slightly after Carter and then Sermon. And Rondo Moore is somebody that I'm really interested in this year. Like I actually took him at like the 110 or 111, one of the leagues that I kind of, it's like a home league. It's a little bit easier league. So I kind of had the luxury of just drafting a player that I wanted to go have fun with. And Rondo Moore adds like this interesting piece to the puzzle because they need a slot guy. So is Christian Kirk completely out of the picture? Is Rondo Moore going to take over all the work? Like, what do you see from Rondo Moore and the Arizona wide receiver corps moving forward?
This is an intriguing one because it is theoretically a very good fit. And Christian Kirk, it's funny, Christian Kirk actually had some good moments there. He had a stretch for about 4 weeks where he was catching touchdowns like crazy, and then right up until where Kyler Murray got fallen upon, if you recall, when all of a sudden tweaked his shoulder and he wasn't the same
shoulder
guy.
Was not right.
He was not, and you could see that dip. He was on pace at one point to have 4,000 yards and 1,000 yards rushing. He was on something nobody's ever seen before in the NFL, which is staggering when you think about that. And then we all know what happened. So it's very difficult because you started to see some moments there from Christian Kirk when everything was working well, then the injury happened, and then slowly things kind of came back, but Kirk's productivity didn't come back with him. I think in this scenario, you've still got the number one true guy being Hopkins, who's going to get a ton of targets. I am fascinated to see what happens with this backfield because I think Edmonds is capable. Connor, as much as I love the story of James Conner and stuff, it's really hard for me to invest in him. They did bring in AJ Green this offseason too, so they've got a lot of pieces here. I think In terms of dynasty situation, yeah, this is Rondo Moore landing there. I think could be a very good situation for him in the next 2 years or so. In terms of redraft, that's a little bit more difficult. I could see him at some point in time starting to make some gains. I think more of a player maybe you start to, in the second half, see perform well too. And I think it would actually help this offense out a little bit too, because I think giving you something intermediate, because we all know Arizona's not a team that's been using their tight end very much. So they kind of lack that over the middle kind of stuff, that short intermediate passes over the middle, which is something that would be another wrinkle into this offense. You know, they've got Hopkins, who's all world. They've had moments where Kenyon Drake or Edmonds have played well, but it's that in the middle that's kind of been lost for this offense, and Moore's a guy that could give you that potentially. So I think this is one of those where you want to pay attention to preseason. Preseason doesn't tell you everything, but if you see him looking good, you see him comfortable running the routes, you see him comfortable with, you know, in terms of the comfortability and the timing with Kyler Murray, then that all of a sudden gives you, okay, maybe there's potential here. If you see him not getting worked in, if you see him kind of struggling with stuff, then you kind of know maybe it's going to take a little bit while longer. So although preseason doesn't tell us a whole lot, it's positions like this with a guy like Moore specifically that I think you can glean a lot from if you're paying attention. And again, this is something that's not going to show up in the box score. You got to watch it to see if it's happening on the field.
I think the play calling too is going to show a lot. Like if you're going to sit there and you're going to get opportunities, you know, in the slot, you're going to be getting screen passes, you're going to be getting jet sweeps, end routes. They're showing that they want to use him in different ways. I think that this could be critical to, you know, Moore's development, of course, and when he actually is able to break out. So,
and the slot wide receivers are very, very fruitful in fantasy.
Yes, they are.
They're so useful, not just in the full point PPRs, even in the half points too. They see a lot of action nowadays, and especially some of these teams that don't have great running games. You know, this is a way to move the football. It's a way the Patriots moved the football for years and years with that intermediate passing game, whether it was Wes Welker or then Julian Edelman or before them, you know, the Troy Browns of the world. So they've, you know, there's for the teams that don't have dominant running attacks necessarily, that intermediate passing game is how you move the chain slowly, and we'll see if Moore can integrate himself into that. But I think it's one of those things that you gotta watch and see if it's developing, because if you don't see it happening in preseason, it might be one of those things that just it might take till October, November to really start to gel a little bit.
No, I agree with you on that 100%. Moore is going to be one of the most, I guess, hit or miss players for redraft this year. He's either going to hit and he's going to crush it, or you're going to end up wasting a draft pick. So when it comes to redraft, he's going to be somebody that I'm definitely going to be waiting on. But Dynasty, I think that he ends up working his way into the system and actually creates great rapport with Kyler Murray. Mm-hmm. So sitting there and looking at another player that's going to be playing out the slot, we have Elijah Moore. Mm-hmm. And we saw how the 49ers used Deebo Samuel. We saw how they used Ayuk. And I do know that Deebo Samuel, he's a little bit more bigger, he's a little more physical. But Ayuk, a little bit more relatable to Elijah Moore. I'm not saying they're the same player. Ayuk's a lot quicker, while Elijah Moore has more of the straight line speed. But either way, it's something as to where like their average depth of target was like 72nd and 108th out of the qualified receivers. So we know that Mims is going to be the field stretcher for the most part, right? He's most likely going to be the field stretcher unless they try to use Corey Davis as like the deep route guy. But I think that Mims, at least for this year, is going to be more of a field stretcher, while Corey Davis plays as intermediate to slightly deeper routes. I think that this is a dream scenario for Elijah Moore out of the slot. You know, if they can design these plays for him very similar to how they did with Ayuk, I mean, you're talking about big-time money, big-time receptions, like high-value targets in the red zone. How are you feeling about Elijah Moore? Is he somebody that you're hopping on the train with, or you're a little bit more hesitant on him?
I'm actually more hesitant, and I do think that getting him involved is crucial for Zach Wilson, because I think what you want is you want the young quarterback there to get comfortable with the speed of the game. You know, it's funny. I'm not the big Wilson guy. Lance was my guy. It was Lawrence and Lance. That's the way I kind of saw the board. And then Fields, I thought, was 3 and Wilson was 4. So it was kind of bizarre to me that number 2 was just Wilson and everyone just landed on that as the Jets. I think for me, because I have so many questions about him still at that NFL level, that's something that I think is strongly I'm considering just waiting and seeing. In rookie drafts, you want to take a shot on him, that's fine. Redrafts, I'm probably not touching this player, just because I don't know what this offense is going to be. I don't know what it looks like. They don't know what it's going to look like. You've got a new coach, brand new system. You've got a brand new young quarterback. You've got a lot of question marks, and typically I find that to be tough investments when you're talking about, you know, young quarterbacks with so many unknowns around them. That is a much different situation. And I love Robert Saleh. I think Robert Saleh is one of the better hires that I've seen in the last few years. I thought it was a travesty that he didn't get a job last year. But at the same time, BYU is not the NFL. And I'll say this too. As good as he looks in some of those moments, and yes, he's got a quick release, and yes, he makes the highlight reel plays. He's fun to watch. So many of those big throws and so many things is such a clean pocket, and he's not going to see that in the NFL in the same way. It's a different game. It's a faster game, and I'm just a little concerned about him hitting the ground running. We'll see if I'm wrong or not, but I'm very skeptical of Wilson and that Jets offense right now.
So, yeah, it's scary. They didn't improve the offensive line. Now they got Becton and Elijah Tucker on there. They rebuilt the offensive line mostly last year. It's going to take small for that chemistry to still hit, but I do think that they are going to protect them.
It takes a while for those guys to all learn to play together when you have new pieces.
And a bigger thing is the fact that look at this division. They got the Dolphins, who were destroying quarterbacks last year. They have one of the best coaches in Belichick that, is great up against rookie quarterbacks. He destroys them all the time. Mm-hmm. And you got the Bills, who they started out a little bit slow with their pass rush, but they got a lot better as the season went on, and they went out there and added 2 more pass rushers in the draft. So they're going to be getting after the quarterback. This is not going to be an easy task. It's not going to be an easy task for him. So Zach Wilson, for me, is in trouble. He's going to have some brilliant play calling, and they're going to have to get the ball out of his hands really quickly.
Jet fans are going to be pissed at me because all summer long I'm going to be saying the same thing. You're going to miss the fact that you're going to look back, I think 5 years, 6 years from now and say, man, we could have had Fields or Lance. And again, maybe Wilson's going to be better. Maybe I'm wrong. I don't know. But this illusion we're under that he had less questions than the other guys, I just didn't understand how he could have less questions. To me, he had equal questions, if not more. So that's, again, everybody's got different views, and, I do the write-ups every year for the quarterback. So quarterback's something I study a lot. And I'm the guy in 2018 who wrote in the black book that I thought Josh Allen was going to be the best quarterback of this class, and people laughed at me. And it's in black and white, so you can go back. And it was so fun this year.
You got receipts. You're telling me you got receipts.
Oh, I got receipts, baby. I got that quote in the Josh Allen one this year. Back in 2018, when I took a lot of slack for this. But it's because guys like Josh Allen, guys like Trey Lance, they have something you can't teach. And all the other stuff you could teach. You can work on footwork. You can work on, recognizing, defenses. There's so many things you can improve on. You can't teach the raw athleticism, instinctual playmaking ability of guys like Josh Allen, guys like Trey Lance. And I think that's the difference for me. And that's what I'm at this point in the NFL where we're at. That's where I put my investments. That's where I put my stock.
Yeah. And I mean, when you have Jordan Palmer out there running a summer camp for all these quarterbacks, you can pretty much fix anything that's mechanical.
Seriously, I might go there.
You can be able to play in the NFL the next year after.
Oh man, this whole body doesn't move the way it used to, buddy. I wish it did.
It still amazes me. I know some people are better coaches than they are players, but Jordan Palmer, man, not being able to make it in the NFL after you can fix all these different quarterbacks issues, it blows my mind. So
everybody finds their groove eventually,
I do want to answer this question from MM321123. He said, isn't Elijah Moore the field stretcher? And it's interesting because he has the speed to be a field stretcher. But you sit there and you look at Ayuk, right? Ayuk was more of a field stretcher in college. He had like 18.3 yards per reception in college. Elijah Moore actually never really was used in that role. So even with Ayuk, who got moved back into the slot position essentially to go play for San Francisco because he fit that position, it's Elijah Moore's already built for this position. And he can come in and play it right off the bat. They were doing ends rounds with Ayuk. They were getting him involved in the screen game. This is stuff that Elijah Moore succeeded in. He only had 13.9 yards per reception in college. He was already being used out of the slot. Elijah Moore, I don't believe is a field stretcher. Correct me if you think differently.
Well, I agree with the notion that he has the speed to be, but I think the way that you would want to use them, if indeed Michael LaFleur is going to come over and do the copy paste of this offense, it's going to be a lot of quick slants over the middle. I mean, and the funny thing was, eventually you saw when you go back to the Super Bowl that they lost. You saw in the second half of that game, all of a sudden the Kansas City linebackers start to really kind of catch in on that. And once they caught on and once they were involved there and once all of a sudden when they started to take that away and you forced Garoppolo to throw the ball deep, that was when the game was over. And then the mistakes happened and the next thing you know, Kansas City wins that Super Bowl. But yeah, that's the makeup of that offense, if indeed that's what we're going to see, which is quick slant, over the middle, quick slant. And then when you need another one, it's a quick slant over the middle. That's what they do. That's how they attack. And they have the personnel to do it. And Moore is that kind of personnel because of his speed that he can fit in there and do that. He's got good hands too. And like I said, I think if Wilson's going to be successful, then it's going to be tied to that. It's going to be about him using that quick release. So play to his strengths, which are getting rid of the football quickly, not making him make reads down the field necessarily on NFL defenses, but you're right 100%. Between Flores and Belichick and in Buffalo, like there's some long days at the office for this kid, and I don't know. It's gonna be tricky. I'm from New York, so New York is a different animal, and I hope the kid's ready for it.
Yeah, I can only imagine, man. I'm so worried about this kid. Like, it's not going to be pretty. It's not going to be pretty, at least for a couple of years. I mean, maybe he adjusts.
Get his mom
maybe
off Instagram too. Oh my God, I don't know what the heck's coming out of her mouth the last 2 weeks, but jeez, that ain't a good way to start.
I saw some stuff today about that. I might have to get on there and check it out.
Oh, it's worth it.
All right, so I want to talk about some of these landing spots. I want to go through some of these landing spots and how it affected some of the other players on the team or affected the rookie. If we're sitting there, we're looking at it. James Robinson's the most obvious one. That's the one that everybody's been talking about. What side of the hill are you on with this one? Are you James Robinson still good, or James Robinson is going to get crushed by a first-round pick?
I think James Robinson gets crushed by the first-round pick. And it's sad to me because I think James Robinson, he's a league winner. And those guys always live in your hearts. And this is coming from the guy that picked up C.J. Anderson everywhere that year that he went off in Denver and then didn't want to touch him. And it's funny because my publication in the Black Book was the only publication that came out that year that did not have C.J. Anderson as a first-round pick. And people are like, how could you do that? What are you doing? I'm like, because he's not. Because I can give you here's a whole list of reasons why. And you just can't live in the past. What happened last year and how run-heavy they were is not going to be the same thing that they are this year. And it's just it's not that Robinson, I think, will disappear overnight. I don't think that's necessarily the case either. But in terms of investability, Travis Etienne at that ADP that I think he's going to be is far more intriguing to me with far more upside as the season progresses. And that's what you want. You want to have talent that as the year goes on, it gets better, not as the year goes on, it gets worse. And I think that's what's going to happen eventually. There will be a phase out of James Robinson as Travis Etienne gets up to speed with things. And it's such a unique situation because of the familiarity with the quarterback where they know each other. And look, anybody who played ball knows this. Like, if you're in a locker room, you're in a huddle, you're in a dugout, it doesn't matter. Like, the dudes you can count on, and when you're out there, playing the game, there's unspoken language, and I think that is a very important thing. And I think that Trevor Lawrence is going to throw the football a whole lot more anyway. So once again, this backfield is going to look very different in terms of the way it shares out too.
It's interesting, like, to sit there and look at it because we had Urban Meyer with a top defense. I think the worst defense he ever had was ranked like 24th in points allowed per game. So to sit there and to, assume that his offense is going to run a certain way this way or a certain way that way, it's tough because he's going to have to adjust everything. He's used to being up. He's used to winning. He's used to having teams not score points. Now he's going to have to keep up, and they're going to have to pass. So I'd like to see how this is going to go. Now he's already kind of structured this offense around passing, first, but it'd be interesting to think about James Robinson on like first and second downs when they're in 4 wide receiver sets and he's facing 5 guys in the box and being able to beat those 5 guys or even 6 guys in the box and being able to get past that and having those 7, 10-yard runs time after time after time because they're expecting this team to pass. Now, is that going to happen long term? I don't know. And I still think that ETN is probably going to be the guy in the backfield doing this because he's going to have the speed to end up getting to the outside and getting those, instead of having 7 to 10-yard runs, getting the 15 to 20-yard runs. But I think that James Robinson can still have value at the beginning of the year. And I think that you can acquire him at a cheap enough price to where you can flip him after 5 weeks of the season and actually see a return. So when it comes to James Robinson, I don't want to own him the whole year, but I'm not hating on drafting him because I still think he can get you value at the beginning and still provide value in a trade halfway through the season. But it's ETN's backfield. It's ETN's backfield, if we're being honest. In Dynasty, I wouldn't touch him. So we got a team, right? We already brought up earlier in Washington. And, we sit there and we're looking at like McLaurin, he's getting drafted in the top 12. Damon Brown is getting drafted around like 180 to like 150 range. And I think that's only going to continue to rise as we get close to the season. Rookie camps hit. You're going to start seeing a rise with him. He was actually taken before Gallup in a startup that I saw the other day. We have Samuel right outside the top 100. He's like right where Michael Pittman is, Laviska Shenault is. And then Logan Thomas is getting drafted as the 8th tight end off the board. All in all, they're projected to put up like 800 fantasy points between the 4 of them, which is, absolutely insane. that means that you're probably looking at a quarterback 1 in Ryan Fitzpatrick, because you still got to add another couple hundred points for the running backs and the other, back end pieces. Is this something as to where the Washington football team players are getting overdrafted, or do you think that they could really have an all-time season like this?
I think that remains to be seen if they're going to be overdrafted. I think it takes a long time to shake the bad of Washington. I mean, it's been bad for a long time, and that's true. I mean, and I think there's an unknown with Fitzpatrick too. Now, what I will say is Fitzpatrick can still throw the football. I mean, he was one of the leaders last year in terms of yards per pass attempt. So, I mean, the guy can still throw. And that's why Brown becomes interesting too, because look, I love McLaurin. I think McLaurin's been one of the most underrated wide receivers in football the last couple of years, and he's played with Dwayne Haskins and Colt McCoy and Alex Smith, and I mean, it's just like the fact that he's been able to do anything with that group is stunning. But you add in Curtis Samuel, who you saw finally little glimpses of him, and he showed you how to use him. He showed you how Joe Brady did a really good job of getting him involved, and I think kind of laid out the blueprint. So if somebody was going to pick him up, there's no reason not to use him in that same way. So I'm confident that they're going to do that, and I'm confident that the Washington football team is going to be right in there once again, battling for that number 1 spot in the East. I think they're certainly the best defensive team there. And if Antonio Gibson continues his rise, at the end of last year, a lot of people didn't realize how well he played. And McKissick had some moments also. But Antonio Gibson, people forget too, he's a converted wide receiver too. He's new to the position. So, the longer he's here, understanding the nuances of running back, I think the better he's going to be. I have him right at that end of RB1, beginning of RB2, as we're working on the RPV right now for the Black Book. And those wide receivers, look, McLaurin's a good investment where he is. Samuel and Brown, I think, are intriguing matchup plays as you go on. I don't think either one of them in redraft I'm ready to just say, oh yeah, they're starters. I think that's kind of silly. But McLaurin, I think, is such a steady presence that if you give him somebody like Fitzpatrick and Fitzpatrick stays healthy, you're going to see Washington be a very competitive football team this year.
I think they're very competitive too, but their defense is too good. They're not going to need to pass a whole ton. I think Antonio Gibson is actually like the secret sauce to this whole thing. 100%. I think he's going to be the best value on this team, unless somehow De'Ami Brown just comes out and crushes it and gets all these long passes. But it's also going to be very volatile. Like you said, more matchup play based. But Antonio Gibson barely played any third downs this past year. Like, he was taken out on third downs because he didn't know how to pass block. And not saying that J.D. McKissick did a ton of that, but like you said, converted running back to wide receiver, back to running back. He has to learn how to play the position the right way. And having this off season is going to be absolutely crucial to his development. Being able to practice, being able to get those reps out of the backfield on passing down situations, learning how to find space, coming out of the backfield. You're going to be talking about Antonio Gibson probably doubling, if not tripling, his reception number from last season. I think it's very possible that he crushes it. And I think they could. I'm not saying that he's definitely going to be, but he could end up as a top 5 back this upcoming season. Just depends on how they use him.
I'm very high on him. I think, like I said, I think you're drafting him as a low RB1, as a low end RB1. But I'm with you. I think the upside's there. And the only thing that I will say is I think they're gonna have to score more than they realize, because last year we take for granted that Dak Prescott was gone and hurt. Saquon Barkley was out. Like the offenses that the Eagles' offense was a disaster last year for most of the year. All of those offenses will be better this year in the division. So I think there will be a slightly more pressure. I don't think it's going to be quite the cakewalk it was for them defensively. I'm not saying it's going to be the worst thing either, but it's going to be a little bit more challenging. So that could potentially still make Fitzpatrick and those guys more profitable than people realize. But Washington's one of those teams that I just think is on the right track right now. And I think that the Eagles are still work in progress. The Giants, I think next year are going to be in the market for a new quarterback. We'll see how that goes. They got so much draft capital. I'd be shocked if Daniel Jones could put it all together and then be good. I mean, I just did this in the Black Book too. I want to say he's got something crazy like 25 turnovers and 20. The amount of turnovers and games that he's played is one of these numbers you just go, I can't even fathom the times between interceptions and fumbles that he's still even a quarterback right now in the NFL. They're going to give him one more shot with all these weapons. We'll see how it goes, but I think Washington's still that team that's going to be right there at the end.
There was one point in the season, it was like by week 10, I think it was week 10, where he had more production, more fantasy points assigned to him from 2 games that he had with his legs than he had that whole time throughout any point in the season with his arm. Like he just wasn't turning out fantasy points, obviously, but he kept turning the ball over, which is, it's gonna be death for your offense.
It is. I know I can pull it up here real quick too, because it's one of those things like you remember writing it and you're writing so many things right now. You just go, oh wait, what did I write about so and this guy and this guy? All right, here we go. In 27 games, he has 29 fumbles and 22 picks. There you go. I found it.
Oh my God!
Right?
Is that fumbles lost or just fumbles? That has to be just fumbles, right?
That's just fumbles. But
that's
honestly,
still insane. That's still ridiculous.
Spoiler alert: there weren't a lot of recoveries, if memory serves, when I did the research. So, and that's why you get the black book, because I do that kind of work. But that's awesome, what I mean. Yeah. You can't look at it and say just because we've added Kenny Galladay and hope that Saquon's healthy, that all of a sudden things go well for the Giants. Like, you can't just automatically think that's going to be the case. You can hope. You could look. Last year, Drew Lock was almost too big to fail, right? Judy, Sutton, Melvin Gordon, Noah Fant, all these things around him, right? It didn't work. So, too big to fail sometimes fails.
Are you cheating on the show sheet? Is this what's happening right now? Is you're just cheating on the show sheet?
I'm not. I'm just a natural. This is why I do this.
That was beautiful. That was beautiful because we're talking
really
about
what's
the
next.
Yep, it says Denver, who also had a great young receiving core. Now feels like they're forever in limbo. That's literally the next line. So sitting there and looking at it, we go from one great receiving core to the other one. I feel like the Broncos could end up chasing a guy like Matt Ryan in this upcoming year after he's able to come off the books without having too big of a salary cap hit. Rodgers is obviously a guy that they're trying to chase after. It seems like they're going to go after a veteran, but this almost feels like a wasted year for Jerry Judy, Cortland Sutton, Noah Fant, KJ Hamler. I mean, if Judy was placed into a rookie pool right now, like let's just say that he was put into a rookie pool, where would you take him? Like after which wide receiver would you take him? Because it's not pretty over there in Denver.
It's not. I still think Jerry Judy's a wonderful talent, and I think it's just a shame that he had, when he started the year, he had Sutton on the other side, and when Sutton got hurt, he had to deal with a lot of double coverage and a lot of attention, and I just think that was a lot to put on a young player like that, especially with bad quarterback play.
They also moved him around a lot to different wide receiver positions, which didn't make sense. I know they were trying to find the right spot for him or whatever the case was, but like to sit there and have to learn multiple different positions with multiple different route trees in one season is kind of like mind baffling why they would do that to a rookie.
They're taking advantage of the fact that he's that good. And I think it was to his developmental detriment, if that makes sense.
Yep, 100%. I agree with you.
I wouldn't take him over Waddle. I wouldn't take him over Smith. I wouldn't take him over Chase. But right after that, I think I would. To answer your question, I think that's where it is. And look, you could even Denver could snap their fingers and all of a sudden change this and none of us see it coming. I will say this. For all of Teddy Bridgewater's deficits, I think Teddy Bridgewater is better than Drew Lock. And I think that you could go look at the Robbie Anderson stats and you can go look at the DJ Moore stats, and I think that bears it out pretty well. So it's a small upgrade, but it's not enough of an upgrade to get excited about. And I like Teddy Bridgewater. I think Teddy Bridgewater is an absolute warrior. What he's gone through to get back and to actually play football
incredible.
Is stunning. And that's the kind of guy you want to play. And he's a good dude. He seems like a really good guy too. I'm still not sold that Aaron Rodgers ends up in Denver. I heard a fascinating little tidbit yesterday about how quiet all the Deshaun Watson stuff is, and that's because there's some rumors going around that he is in payouts basically about all these things.
I've seen that.
And if indeed that happens, then Deshaun Watson, who knows? Like maybe they can move on from him, and maybe it's a situation where some team is desperate enough, and Denver at this point might be desperate enough and to be relevant again. Yeah,
and I mean we just had MM321123. He said, if you're drafting today, do you spend a pick on Deshaun Watson? And I honestly, like up until something else happens, I think that he plays. I think that he might see a suspension, but I do think that he plays. I just don't know if I want to have him on my roster, though, essentially. Like,
it's a giant. Well, here's the thing. Even if he does play, that team is awful, right? And they did get worse, if that's possible.
They did.
I think there's such a cloud over that team right now. However, I think right now, the only conversation we're having is best ball, right? If you're drafting right now. So if you're drafting right now in a best ball league, he's floating around there as a second, sometimes even third quarterback. That's the kind of thing that could win you a league if he comes back and plays like Deshaun Watson, because Deshaun Watson's a top 5-6 quarterback in the league. So right now, it's a very tough thing to invest in. And in single quarterback leagues right now, there's no reason to invest in it until you have more clarity. I would be shocked if he didn't start the year on the commissioner's exempt list, which we all
Yes.
love that. That would be my guess. How long that is, I don't know. My guess would be 4 to 6 weeks, somewhere in that. And that's already a good chunk of a regular season that I'm out. I just don't care. There's the Joe Burrows and Trevor Lawrences and Justin Fields and some really exciting young quarterbacks if I want to have a second quarterback on my roster.
Joe, I don't know if you're aware, okay, but you're part of a gigantic group of degenerates over there on fantasy football discussion
possible.
and probably Twitter too, but fantasy football discussion namely, because we've already had like 10 drafts that happen over this past week. I mean, I was in 28 leagues this past year. We had like at least 15 drafts for those 28 leagues in the week after the draft. So I think that you drafted more than just best ball, but also last year there was a little bit of a hiccup because there was no best ball to play in the best ball.
Well,
wasn't
yeah,
the best,
last
best
year.
ball.
Last year was a weird year. I think we could all just kind of chalk that up. But you know what? As much as I want to get going in draft season, it's just, the longer you wait, the better off you are to at least start the season competitively. And yes, it does favor some of the people who are super, like people who watch this show, people who listen to Fantasy Pros, they're always going to have a leg up on everybody else because they're going to know where the value is early on and know where to take shots. And then as the draft season goes on, those shots, the ADPs of those guys start to rise because everybody's talking about them. So there's pluses there, but there's also risk. And you always got to take that into the earlier you draft, you have the risk of guys, you lose 3 or 4 guys on your team before the season starts.
No, and that is the reality of it, but some people, we just can't help it, man. We get the itch. Like, we're sitting there, got the itch, man. We got to go draft.
I know.
All right, so let's stick with
you, brother.
Let's stick with Denver real quick because we talked about Williams a little bit earlier and Gordon. And, Gordon, he seemed like he was on his way out. You talked about how he's missing games, how he couldn't stay on the field, and, how he has issues now. But, last year he comes to Denver, he puts up over 1,000 total yards, 10 touchdowns. He finishes the RB14. He just doesn't seem to go away. But the thing about Gordon is he's really not that old either. Like, he's not like this aging veteran who's, past his prime, like a Mark Ingram type player. This guy's still somewhat young. And sitting there and looking at it, I was talking about this around this time, like 2 years ago. I was like, watch, the way that the running backs are getting treated and the way the money's working out for the running backs, you're not going to see a lot of running backs go out there and try and get these bell cow contracts as often. Teams are figuring out it's not working. The draft capital is falling for running backs. Running backs are going to start teaming up, and you're going to start seeing things like Nick Chubb, for example, and Kareem Hunt, who now you have 2 good running backs who can split carries, and their career might be elongated slightly because they're not taking all the work. We look at, Kenyon Drake is a little bit different because I think Kenyon Drake could have gone to Vegas, got paid $6 million versus 11.5 or whatever that number is. But now you have Josh Jacobs, Kenyon Drake. We're seeing these veteran running backs in a lot of cases actually want to go team up with another running back to create more of a committee so they don't have to handle the full workload. Most of them are taking pay cuts outside of Kenyon Drake, but is Melvin Gordon, who, by the way, jumped on this team when they already had Philip Lindsay, right? And when they just drafted, Royce Freeman to an extent, although that's just another nightmare that I don't want to talk about. Could he end up seeing an extension here in Denver? Like, could he end up taking less money because he's already done it once? I know he's already getting paid from the Chargers still at the same time, but could he take less money and try and elongate his career and go at a committee approach?
I don't think with the Broncos. I don't. Although I think that the Cleveland Browns were very ahead of the curve there with Chubb and Hunt together, and at the time it seemed kind of puzzling. But looking back on it now, the best thing about that is how much pressure it took off of Baker Mayfield. And you saw as the second half of that season went on, the Browns played really good football, and Baker Mayfield looked the most comfortable he has in the NFL. I think that the presence of Williams there is the writing on the wall for Gordon. I think Gordon was an interesting get when they got him. He's 28 years old. In terms of workload, my problem with Gordon is, the last couple of years, you see, even those last 2 years with the Chargers, 12 games, 11 games, he kind of disappeared at the worst possible times, especially in fantasy. So, although I do think you're going to see a lot more teams kind of try this whole running back by committee, having 2 guys. You're seeing Arizona, going and saying, well, we got a couple guys who can do it. You could play the hot hand. You've seen the success that San Francisco's had at times with it. But at the same time, some running backs work better when they touch the football, and they're rhythm running backs. And it's very rare you get the guys that are very impactful where they can just touch the football 10 times. They want 15, 20 carries to get in that rhythm and to get in that feel of the game. And that's an important thing. So it really does matter, specifically the running back, the system, the situation. So many of those things have to work. And I was the guy last year who said that Kareem Hunt and Nick Chubb were both going to be RB1s in PPR when all was said and done. And once again, that seemed like a hot take and a crazy thing to say, but it was more based on the situation that I thought this could happen. It would be a very smart way for the offense to run, let Baker Mayfield do a ton of play action, let him be successful that way rather than trying to throw the ball downfield and make reckless throws that he could get away with in college he can't get away with in the NFL. That is the difference, I think, there. And to me, I think that this situation here with Gordon and Williams, I think they brought in Gordon to see how it worked. I think they're happy to have the two guys this year. I think after this year, they're happy to let Williams kind of take the workload. That would be my instincts, at least.
Well, I mean, you're pretty much right on point with that. I mean, they're very similar running backs too. So that was another, aspect. When you look at Nick Chubb and Kareem Hunt, they're not
different,
completely different, but they do have two different skill sets.
Chubb is a more, Chubb is one of those more old school throwback running backs.
Yeah.
Kareem Hunt's a little bit more with the juke and the miss, and Kareem Hunt's so good in space, which is what made him so great in Kansas City. I mean, that is a shame that situation ended poorly. But that was a guy that was tailor-made for that situation with Patrick Mahomes too, and that's why he just blew up so quickly there. So it's a shame he couldn't stick around there. But you know what? I thought Cleveland did a good job of utilizing him, and I'm fascinated to see how Cleveland works Odell back in now that they've kind of found their groove, because he wasn't there when they did, and that's going to be a fascinating thing to see. Can he take a backseat to be the guy when he needs to be instead of the guy that gets 12 targets a game?
Yeah, we'll see how that goes. I mean, honestly, it's something as to where Odell is now almost like an afterthought in a lot of cases. But I do want to hop on to another running back who is good in space and who, does well with 10 touches a game. We got Austin Eckler, right? He just got a huge upgraded offensive line. They went and they bought a few pieces, and then, of course, they drafted probably the steal of the draft in Slater. Are we sitting there looking at a scenario as to where Austin Eckler could be even more efficient than what he was? And is he a steal right now in drafts? I mean, he's going like the fourth and fifth rounds in some cases, which last year was going at like the turn. He's going at the 2-3 turn.
I haven't seen anything fourth, fifth round, so I want to be in these drafts where you are. I don't know what's going on here and who you're drafting with and who's had too many whiskeys, but I want to be on this. His ECR right now is number 16 overall, which I think is just about right. So on FantasyPros, that's about where he is right now, and most of the people up there who have their rankings up already and start like I have, Tags has, Yates, like our personal crew and a few other people. So I think that's a good spot. We were talking about him going right around the same point as Cam Akers, Joe Mixon, Antonio Gibson. So that's the crew that he's kind of going around with, and I think that's fair. I think you can make the case. It's a risk reward situation with Mixon, but they didn't do anything else to kind of cover their base there, running back. They made a financial investment in Mixon last year. It's one of those things where you might live and die with it, but if it's good, it's going to be really good. I think he's in that conversation right there with Eckler. I think Antonio Gibson could eclipse him this year. I like Eckler. I think 16 is a perfect kind of spot. I think that's the sweet spot for him, and right now in half-point PPR, that's where he is, just to kind of split the difference so everybody's miserable. But yeah, that's where he is right now on the board, and you can also make the argument it's safer to make an investment in the DK Metcalfs and Calvin Ridleys of the world too, who are going to go right around there too, just because, once again, wide receiver or running back at this point, if you have the elite guys, it's great. If you don't, then, maybe it's better kind of finding your way with running back as it goes and finding some value as the draft unfolds.
So I just checked it up. We did a draft today, actually, and he went 3-8 in a startup. So I was exaggerating a little bit. So third, fourth round is where he's sitting in a lot of these cases. And I've been doing mock drafts.
That's surprising. But it's a startup dynasty, you said, Chase?
Yep.
In the startup dynasty, guys like Eckler, I think, get lost in the shuffle a little bit because they don't have the track record. They have upside still, but they don't have the upside of the guys who are just fresh into the league. So like the Najee Harrises of the world and the Jamar, Chases of the world are very exciting new sexy toys that everybody wants to have. And guys like Eckler are the ones who get value suppressed. So, in Dynasty, it's a 2 to 3 year window, so I wouldn't overthink it too much. I would basically, just sprinkle in, a little bit more of the youth, like a couple spots, but not overdo it too much. But some people do. I think Eckler is the exact kind of guy that kind of gets lost in the shuffle of a Dynasty startup.
All right, so there's another guy that I think is a steal because I do think that Austin Eckler is a steal. I think that he presents the upside, better offensive line. Weapons are aging. We don't even know if Mike Williams is going to play 5 games or 12 games, but he's not going to play the full slate. Eckler makes a lot of sense to be somebody that's a steal. But in rookie drafts, we got Hunter Long. Hunter Long ended up going to Miami, right? Tight end. And this guy was perceived to be the second best tight end, essentially. And everybody's talking about how underrated he is because of the fact that Kyle Pitts is getting all the talk, right? And he comes out. He ends up going to Miami. They already have Gesicki there, but Gesicki's more of like a slot wide receiver. He's not really he's a big slot guy. He's not really a tight end. He rarely lines up in line. They got Smythe over there, who's more of the blocking type tight end. Why is Hunter Long not getting any kind of respect in rookie drafts? I mean, he's falling completely out of it.
Yeah, well, Freiermuth, let's not forget about him. That kid's pretty talented,
yeah.
too. If Kyle Pitts weren't in this draft, we'd be talking a whole lot more about Pat Freiermuth, and he's a very talented guy. Kyle Pitts is his freaking nature, and I'm one of these guys who is leading that charge where, yes, no rookie tight end ever makes an impact until one does. And I'll tell you what, I'm pretty comfortable with him in the middle of tight ends because, after you get past the first 5-6 guys, it's like, well, why not take a shot on Kyle Pitts? Just why not? I think with Long, there's a weird obsession out there in the fantasy community with Mike Gesicki that I do not share. I haven't shared it for 2 years. I don't get it. I don't understand it. And so far, I haven't been worse off because of it. So I can't tell you. I think it's probably the reason why Long is getting kind of missed out on or maybe passed over is because of that negative stigma to the rookie tight end. So I think he'd be somebody that people would rather, wait and see how they do or pick him up, later on the waiver wire if he does start to play a little bit, then make draft capital investments on him. And that's fair considering the tight end position and considering that depth chart wise, they did add Waddle, they did add Fuller, they do have Gesicki. Like, they've added a lot more pieces now. So where would he even fit in? And I think that's the unknown. And you've still got young guys like Irv Smith, who I think are going to make a jump. Cole Kmet, who I think is capable of making a jump. Cole Kmet was a matchup disaster at Notre Dame. Nobody gives that guy any credit. And he had terrible quarterback play last year. And I think if you give him something good at quarterback, he might actually surprise you this year. So there's some guys that are even on that peripheral outside of the top 12 tight ends. So I think that's also part of the reason. Maybe that changes in a tight end premium. Maybe Long gets more attention there, down the road in a dynasty. But for now, I think it's a wait and see approach because it does take these guys typically longer to, acclimate themselves to the league. It does.
But like, you can't get Irv Smith Jr. now. You can't get Cole Kmet now. So,
no. But there's that whole group, but none of them have lived up to their potential yet. Like Noah Fant, Irv Smith, Cole Kmet, all these guys are, you're not wrong in that. What you're saying is correct. But still, look, we're 1 to 2 years in on all those guys, and we're still waiting.
Well, Irv Smith Jr. is one of the most underrated players out there, in my opinion, especially
100%.
Like the tight end position. He averaged the second most points per target of any tight end in the NFL last year. 2.44 points per target, which is nuts. So there's vacated targets for Kyle Rudolph, right? 37 of them. And there are two different tight ends. I'm not saying that he's going to get all of them, but he's going to see an increase. If he did hypothetically see the extra 37 targets that Kyle Rudolph vacated, Irv Smith Jr. would have been tight end 3 on the season if you end up taking his points per target and applying it to that. Once again, that's not going to happen. That's not how things work in fantasy. But I just wanted to point that out, that if he did see those extra 37 targets, he would be up there.
Here's another fun one. Kirk Cousins is not as bad as everybody thinks. Okay, ready? Another thing right from Black Book, right? Because like I said, I've been doing nothing but quarterback write-ups and podcasts for the last 2 weeks. So quarterback write-up, he's a slow starter. Okay, September of 2019, 3 touchdowns, 2 picks, and 183 passing yards per game in September of 2019. The next 2 months after that, 18 touchdowns, 1 interception, averaging 288 per game. In 2020, first 6 games, 11 touchdowns, 10 picks, 245. Ugh, okay, not very good. Over the next 10 games to finish the season, 24 touchdowns, 3 interceptions, 279. Kirk Cousins is better than you think he is. The problem is Kirk Cousins does not seem to start well for whatever reason these last few years. If he starts off better, my goodness, that's tremendous. And Adam Thielen, I think the aging of Adam Thielen, you're starting to see, I think, the wear and tear a little bit on the body. And I think it's perfect for Irv Smith to maybe take more targets than we realize.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I think that Irv Smith Jr. is somebody that is poised for breakout and should be at least a top 8 tight end. I think I have him as top 5 for redraft this year. He's like right there on the borderline. So I'm excited for Irv Smith Jr. But let's go back to the Dolphins real quick because you did bring up that they drafted Waddle. And so the addition of Long, the addition of Waddle, you said you're not a big Gesicki fan, but
Not.
Waddle's probably going to end up playing the slot this year. Plus, they have Lynn Bowden Jr. that's going to be playing the slot as well. Like, is Gesicki going to get phased out of this offense? Is he a Dolphin moving forward? Like, is he even going to be playing in the NFL in 3 years from now?
Don't matter to me. I got no Gesicki. Not gonna have any Gesicki. Won't get no your Gesicki. This Gesicki. No. You know what? I just I don't get it. I don't see it. And look, sometimes we miss things. Everybody's wrong about stuff. I'm wrong about things too. Everyone's wrong about stuff sometimes. But I'm until proven otherwise. I'm gonna sit here and I'm gonna say that Mike Gesicki is not a fantasy entity that I care about, and Jalen Waddle is. And Will Fuller is, especially 1 year show me deal Will Fuller, and you still got Parker kicking around there. There's a lot of mouths to feed out there and a lot of good wide receivers. And I also think you have to give Tua this full healthy offseason with full OTAs, with full preseason, not coming off major hip surgery, not coming off any of that before we start judging how good Tua can be in the NFL. I think it's grossly unfair. The kid is an incredible competitor. I think the fact that he was even on the field last year is stunning. And you know what? I think that everybody is just, needs to take a deep breath, because if you go back and watch some of the film of Tua in college, it's a pretty good film. I think everybody would agree Tua was pretty good at playing that quarterback position. Oh, right, and he's really comfortable with some of these guys that he's playing with right now. So I'm going to tell you right now, the Dolphins, I think, have set themselves up in a very good situation to improve. They have done an excellent job the last couple of years here. Flores has done a great job with this team. And from a fantasy standpoint, I like the wide receivers. I think there's even some value there later with Gaskin and Ahmed that you can really, potentially have some of those guys on the cheap and get more productivity. Andrew Erickson, who writes for me for Black Book, he had some great stats last year on Myles Gaskin in some of those moments. And Salvon Ahmed at times last year looked good also, and they did not draft a running back, which I thought was particularly curious. So they must like what they've got there in one of those guys, or the combination, as you mentioned before. Gesicki to me is the piece where I'm just not excited.
Well, they just believe in analytics to an extent. They just know that running backs are overvalued, and running backs don't win games anymore. So it's different. All right.
Unless you're named Derrick Henry.
Very true. Very, very true on that. I couldn't agree with you more. All right, I'm going to get chatted here. But real quick, I was sitting here and I was going through the schedule earlier today. And the NFL has done a great job of putting these divisional games at the end of the season, to make it more competitive, to bring up the TV ratings. But I'm looking at the schedule, right? And the schedule for Washington has the Dallas Cowboys, then Philly, then the Dallas Cowboys, then Philly, then the Giants. That's the last 5 games.
Wow. Yeah, it's almost like a play-in. You know what? I mean, you know what? The NFC East has earned that crap show. You know what? They were such a crap show last year.
Right.
You know what? Let them play among themselves until they figure it out at the end. You know what? You guys have a round robin rock paper scissors tournament and let me know who wins, and you can come play in the playoffs with the real teams. Yeah.
Well, it's not the whole NFC East, right?
No, but keep it for a while. But what's so fascinating there is that if that defense is playing well, and let's say the Giants have really hit the skids and the Eagles are disappointing, that's a stretch where Washington could really kind of drive things home a little bit. And I think Dallas is going to be right there with them. Dallas did make some improvements defensively year over year. Not enough. But to me, it was game plan. To me, game plan, they were always just out of it game plan wise. And you also saw that when Van Der Esch was out and then he came back, they did play a little bit better. And I think now they got Micah Parsons and Van Der Esch, 2 linebackers who can really go sideline to sideline. That goes a long way in helping things out a little bit. On the defensive side, I think Dallas and Washington are going to be there. I'm just not buying the Eagles or the Giants. Sorry.
All right, we got one last question, and I'm going to get you out of here. All right, we're going to see a family feud with Joe and Tags.
I don't know if it's going to be me and Tags. Rest assured, Fantasy Feud is coming back. It's always a classic with Tags and myself. That is for sure. We always have a good time there. But yes, we have a whole host of them lined up. It's going to be a beautiful thing. Dan Harris is going to be in on it. Yates is going to be in it. I'm going to be in on it. The whole family's going to be there. It's going to be legitimate family fantasy feud. But yes, I don't know exactly what the matchups are yet, but it's coming down the pike. So yes, stay tuned. It's happening.
Oh, I love it, man. Go ahead and let everybody know where to find you, and let's get you out of here.
Well, you can find me on the Twitter machine at Joe Pisapia17. You can check out the Fantasy Black Book on Amazon and on iTunes. Amazon June 1st. That's what we're shooting for. Great group of folks writing for that again for me this year. And of course, over at Fantasy Pros. And you can see me every Sunday morning talking sports over on Sports Grid Television on the wagering side of things too. So thanks for having me, Chase. It was fun to talk a little football. Now I'm all excited. I want to go do a bunch of drafts where I get Austin Eckler in the 3rd round. That's what I want to do now.
Oh man, good luck with it. I think I might have just been getting lucky if you're telling me that he's up there at expert consensus ranking 18. So I mean that's right around where I have him. I can't believe that he's going lower than that. So.
I told you those dynasty startups, you get a little bit too much, just sometimes too much rookie love. People get a little excited, but it's those weird players in between that have had like one good year, but you don't have a full boat yet, and people are unknown. They're afraid to make the investment, so it's a risk, but it's one that could pay off.
No, I love it. Absolutely love it. And you guys can go check out our content over there at fantasyintervention.com. Once again, that's fantasyintervention.com. You guys can go find us over there on Twitter at FF_intervention for myself, or join our circle _. You also have us over there on Facebook at Fantasy Football Discussion, where you have 24 active members, active every single day. 24,000 active members.
I think it's a little bit more than 24.
24,000.
It's like 2,000 guys
members.
And gals talking football. That's it. Just 2,000.
It's a full 24,000. It's pretty insane, man. Like the comments, the starter sit questions. Like you should see us. We do the live starter sit before the show.
I've seen you guys. I watch your show. I've seen your show. So
it gets insane. It gets a little bit crazy.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Anyways, we appreciate you
never know
guys.
Who's watching, Chase?
You never do. Bob Harris pops in here all the time.
Oh, Bob is my dude.
I love Bob Harris, man. He's one of my favorites.
Anyone who doesn't love Bob Harris, something's wrong with them.
That's very true. Well, I appreciate you guys for tuning in, and thank you guys for letting us intervene with your fantasy football life. We're out.